everyone, and welcome to Please Don't Take This Personally, the podcast revolution where women and men reclaim the agency that's ours by birthright. Where we take on those please don't take this personally moments, you know, the ones that are meant to keep us small and shut us down and keep the status quo. And instead, we flip that script right on its head and we are stopping taking things personally and start taking action. Here, equity is lived, not debated. Wisdom speaks louder than noise, and power, it isn't about a win-lose situation, but it is unapologetically inclusive and shared. I am Lynn Ferrari. I am your host, and I cannot even believe we are already here at episode 4. And before we dive in, I just want to say thank you so much. This is a dream of a lifetime of mine. I am having a blast, and I so appreciate everyone who has listened and shared and reached out and sent feedback and thrown amazing topic ideas my way. I really appreciate it, and they will be included. One of the things that has truly energized me since launching this podcast is the involvement of men. I have had so many men reach out to me, join the podcast revolution, not just to listen, but to engage. And they're asking questions and sharing how these conversations do include them as well, that they are impacted by these please don't take this personally moments, that they also suffer from and experience some of the topics that we've talked about. And that kind of curiosity, that kind of willingness to be in the conversation and not just observe it, that gives me hope that we can accomplish the goal of this podcast revolution, that we can co-create together in a way that's extraordinary. And because of that, I made a little bit of a shift. You may have noticed that I changed a little bit at the intro, and I'm no longer saying women and the men who support us. I'm simply saying women and men, period. But let's be clear, I am absolutely here to supercharge empowerment for women, and that remains my mission. But empowerment is not a gated community. There is room and an invitation for everyone who is ready to step up, step in, challenge the status quo, and create something better where we can just breathe and live. Really, at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want? To just live our lives in peace and coexist without all of this mishigosh. So last episode, we exposed imposter syndrome as manufactured doubt, a lie. It is a system-engineered doubt bomb. Don't you love that term? I totally loved coming up with that. Think about it, a system-engineered doubt bomb, designed to make you question your worth and hold back. And what you learned is that you are not an imposter. An imposter is someone who deliberately deceives, manipulates, and they fake it. They fake their way in. They are a fraud. And we learned that that is not you. You're not here by accident. You didn't trick your way in. You earned it. You may feel differently, but we learned that feelings aren't the same as being true. But that whisper in your head, the one that keeps telling you don't belong, that's the actual fraud. You also learned last week how the system was not built for us, and that's why we feel like a fraud, that feeling that we're different because we weren't welcomed, so there's a gap. You learned actionable strategies, including the 4 Ps, prepare, practice, pause, participate, to recognize and dismantle this manufactured doubt, and why breaking free from this conditioning is more than just a personal win. It is a world-changing event, truly. And if you're here for episode 4, I already know something about you. You are ready to shed that manufactured doubt. You are done waiting for permission. You are ready to live unapologetically and claim what was already yours. So let's get into it for episode 4. I'm going to ask you a question here. How many times have you seen someone less qualified, less competent, and sometimes just downright mediocre get handed opportunities that were yours or that you had to fight for? How many times have you watched someone, and as we speak about men, and those men that are inequitable? Have you watched those men breeze through a high stakes meeting completely unprepared and somehow walk out like a leader? And in the immortal words of Taylor Swift's song, The Man, when everyone believes ya, what's that like? Yeah, those moments. And how many times have you heard women, brilliant women, say things like, I just got lucky, I'm not sure I'm ready for this role, and my all time favorite, maybe this is a stupid question. And it is enough. It is time to be done. So we woke up to the fact that the imposter syndrome is a manufactured lie. And today we're going deeper. And I cannot think of a better person than to do this with than Betsy Myers. So Betsy has advised US presidents. She's shaped major political campaigns and worked with women at the highest levels of power. Women who, by every measure of success, should be completely immune to manufactured doubt. But guess what? They're not. And she has seen firsthand how, even at the top, manufactured doubt is still one of the most effective tools of control. And since 70% of people, men and women, struggle with manufactured doubt, that means that you either experience it yourself or interact with someone who does every single day. So whether you've sat in a room and second guessed yourself or felt like you didn't belong, or if you lead, manage, or engage with other human beings in any capacity, this episode is for you. This is for everyone. All right, let me formally introduce Betsy Myers as my powerhouse of a friend and woman and guest on this topic this week. So Betsy is a trailblazing leader. She is a renowned speaker. She's an author, an advisor, and she's worked at the highest levels of business, government, and academia. She served as the senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, acting as President Clinton's White House advisor on women's issues, and later as chief operating officer and chair of Women for Obama during his historic 2008 campaign. Betsy is the author of Take the Lead, Motivate, Inspire, and Bring Out the Best in Yourself and Everyone Around You. And she is a senior advisor at the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute at the University of Cincinnati. But wait, there's more. Betsy also sits on the Council on Advancing Women in Business for the U.S. Export-Import Bank and on the board of the International Leadership Association. She has such remarkable experience, and Betsy's mission is clear: transform leadership by building a stronger, more purpose-driven leadership and teams. Please welcome Betsy Myers. Hello, Betsy Myers, and welcome to Please Don't Take This Personally.
Good morning or good afternoon, Lynn, and good to see you.
It is so good to see you as well. Betsy, I shared your amazing background and all of the service and contributions you've made to the world and the country and women in my introduction. But I did want to share with our listeners how we even know each other, because I've also disclosed that I'm Lynn Ferrari and I am a recovered imposter syndrome. So when I first met Betsy, I worked at Starbucks, and our general legal counsel, Lucy Helm, had asked me to do a leadership session. And we included Betsy, who had just written her book. And I got to meet Betsy and see you standing there being amazing. And I said to myself, I want to be Betsy. I want to be Betsy. And in your inclusive way, when I told you that, you said, oh, you already have it. You just need to do these things. And so it was so amazing. And then we just stayed in touch. But then I was invited to your amazing webinar through the real estate group that you work with. And it's that a powerful part about, how the imposter syndrome impacts us all. And this is a space that we both actively work in. And I have to tell you, Betsy, I think the thing about imposter syndrome, much like recovery, that's why I use the example, is I don't know that you get over it. I think you learn how to be aware of it. So here we are, we're on the webinar, and I'm looking at you and I'm going, oh my God, I'm inadequate. Betsy's so powerful.
My God,
Yeah,
so funny. Now that
right?
we do things to each other, yeah, or to ourselves. I mean, we do that to ourselves.
We
Yeah.
do that to ourselves, right? And so obviously that wasn't the case. And of course, when I invited since then, I said, oh yeah, we absolutely need Betsy on here. So
One of the reason that I'm focused on imposter syndrome, in addition to the agreement that it's stifling businesses, it's stifling women and men, there's tons of data out there, is I believe that when women specifically feel and act more confidently, we literally change the world. Women who stand up or are confident stand up for their pay. Women who are confident and girls who are confident don't get into cars with men or answer online invitations. So I think, you and I are of that generation where we thought imposter syndrome was really more just, oh, we're feeling inadequate. But I sincerely believe that it has deep impacts on the way that we're living and working and how we're getting there. So why don't we just start there? Why don't we start with how do you see imposter syndrome and why is it so important to you in this work?
Well, it's such an interesting thing because there's so many interconnected pieces to the imposter syndrome. So, in my work that I've been doing in women's issues and women's policy and women's empowerment for almost 40 years, it's hard to believe. I've always been curious on this aspect of where we hold ourselves back, how
Mm,
society holds us back. And it's really interesting because I was having a conversation with my 22-year-old daughter, Maddie, about the imposter syndrome. And she made this comment to me, which has really stuck with me in this work, which she said, I don't really understand, Mom, because being a woman is our superpower.
mm,
And
yep.
I thought, you know what? That is like so true. It's our superpower. It was all the gifts that we bring to the world, the feminine aspect of leadership. Women bring so much of the authenticity and transparency and caring and listening, and empathy and all those things, right? So I've always been curious about what is it in women, and I've looked at worthiness and self-doubt,
Hmm.
which are kind of the pieces of the imposter syndrome, because the imposter syndrome is flawed beliefs,
Right.
not true.
Right.
That is what this mission is about. The imposter syndrome is that we have flawed beliefs about success, about if we fail, and our self-worth, and that lies at the root of the imposter syndrome. So to be our best and brightest selves, because I always say that each of us is born with a package of gifts,
Mm,
share with the world. And so in my leadership work, it's always been about how do we shake off the aspects of ourself that aren't working. Because I always say our authentic self is the beautiful things about each of us that make us uniquely us.
hmm.
Then the sticky floor or the behaviors. Rebecca Shambaugh, my friend of mine, wrote a book called It's Not About the Glass Ceiling, it's about the sticky floor.
Oh, wow.
Not great, because she's like, yeah,
Yes.
we still have a glass ceiling. Yes. Have we made progress? Yes. But what are the behaviors that I do that keep my feet stuck to the floor? So I always say that each of us has the authenticity part to us that gets us to us, and then we have the behaviors that keep us from us.
Mm, yeah.
So when you think about the imposter syndrome, if we were to blow up this imposter syndrome and start to talk about it and unpeel the onion, how do we just shed that or bring awareness to it? Does it ever go away?
Hmm.
I mean, I think we all struggle because as we grow in our lives, just when we think we got one thing fixed, now we have another aspect.
Yeah, the layer, I call it the layers of the onion.
Right, right.
Correct. I agree with you. It is the belief, right? Because when we actually look at the definition, an imposter is someone who intends to deceive. Imposter syndrome is that we believe we are deceiving. We're not who we are. And that is a very important distinction.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you mentioned in the webinar was that this is not just about women, that this is about a lot of people, especially in business, and that surprisingly, especially women of industry or executive women, that we make a assumption that they don't suffer from this. So what are you seeing out there? How is this impact like? Yeah, what are you seeing out there?
Well, research shows that all people, human beings, men and women, have the experience of an imposter at some point in their life.
Okay.
So men struggle with it too. But I think if we really step back on this, is like men somehow do a better job often if they can push through it. Sometimes I always think that somehow we women, we internalize people's reaction to us or society's reaction to us, or the microaggressions that happen, that something's wrong with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that men don't have these kinds of feelings too, but they somehow push through it in a different way. And I think that's the difference, because we actually internalize these feelings that are not, and they cause us. So I always say a baby isn't born into the world. A little girl's not born into the world thinking, I don't belong, I don't deserve, and I'm an imposter. So that's what I've been curious about, the technical imposter syndrome or lack of confidence or self-doubt. How was that fueled by society, by cultural norms, by societal expectations of what leadership looks like, what women,
Mm-hmm.
how they should behave, right? And
Yep.
so we get these messages all the time that are coming at us, which fuel the imposter syndrome. Because again, to reiterate,
Ah,
the imposter syndrome is flawed beliefs.
right. Appearing real.
Exactly.
That is very pivotal. Because one of the tenets of this podcast is that we need the men to come along, right? We're not going to do this on our own. And to your point, my experience in 40 years in business, I'm right up there with you, is that men definitely have more of a persona. They're not going to let you see that they're maybe feeling insecure, et cetera. And that comes out in negative ways if they're not healthy. It will be unhealthy, toxic dynamics or power dynamics, or they kind of power themselves through it almost in a force, right? Fight and force
Right, right.
versus us internalizing it. So that is a very pivotal part. And I also believe that what would it look like, Betsy, if we were able to have a conversation together, right? To be in a room. So I did managing around international borders course a long time ago, and there was this example of all of these German men, and they had to say, "What is something that you wouldn't know about me?" And one of them started by saying, "I love to laugh." And then all the other German men started saying, "I love to laugh too." But it was a ethos that wasn't acceptable for men and in their culture. But once they connected in their little German accents and was really hysterical, they opened up. So being able to understand that this does go across gender, but it definitely impacts women. Okay, so let's stay on the women's side, because one of the reasons I started this podcast was I do believe that when women rise, again, I'm not making up anything anyone else hasn't said, we all win. So you mentioned about historical and institutional impacts. Let's start at the very beginning a little bit. What are some of the things you believe got us here that we need to look at and address to begin to dismantle some of this?
Well, the impact of the implicit bias, right?
Okay,
Because
talk more about that.
we all have bias, right? And all of us have bias at some level of our life of some things. Sometimes, though, implicit bias is bias we're not aware of.
Okay.
So you're not aware of it until you make decisions based on, well, for whatever reason, I see leadership as a strong man, authoritative man, you know? So that's what I base so then you see a woman coming into the mix in leadership and who is different, and implicitly you think, well, she doesn't have what it takes to be a leader, right? So implicit bias of like how you think something should be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think we've done a lot of work across organizations on bias training or bias awareness, and it doesn't work. It doesn't really move the needle. We
Ah,
have to have more conversations about, and women have bias too. We all do.
sure.
So in organizations, when you're up against, you know, it's like when we think a woman is aggressive, well, if she's strong and shows up and presents her opinion, she's aggressive, but a man is seen as assertive. And
Yes. Oh,
that's
yeah.
seen as leadership, but she's seen as aggressive, and ooh, we don't like aggressive women. So then she gets the message that she's not, and we do it in different ways: eye roll, ignore, pass by in a meeting. We know where someone will, this happens all the time with women, where they'll make a suggestion or an idea and no one really listens. And then the guy in the room makes the same point and everyone says, wow, that's such a great idea. So those kinds of things that are called microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
Time, women start thinking, wait, something's wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I being ignored? Why am I not invited to that meeting? or whatever it is. And so it's a build. That's why I think nobody is born with this.
Right.
We don't go into the workplace thinking, I don't belong, I shouldn't be here. But over time, it's just this building upon that fuels the sense of imposter, the sense of self-doubt.
That makes a lot of sense. So, in that work that you do, when you're working with organizations, what are some of the things, tools or advice that you give people on beginning to be aware of that, how to break down those biases or bring those conversations into the table?
Well, I think part of it is just having this conversation,
Yeah.
right? This imposter syndrome or self-doubt, like you have to talk about it. Because the one thing is, I always say it's so important, which is why we do these webinars, why we do these conversations, is that 70% of people feel this way at some point in their career. We're not alone. And that happens sometimes with women. And it's so important, female alliance, like
Hmm.
female allies, is that to feel I'm not alone, I'm not the only one who feels this way. So to kind of blow up the imposter syndrome is kind of to have these conversations about, because the problem with the imposter syndrome is, or self-doubt is what we do to compensate for it,
Oh, yes, that
right?
totally. Yeah.
That's the problem because
Oh, wow.
then step into perfectionism, over preparing, attributing all our success to luck, those kinds of behaviors, and particularly with women, the perfectionism, they're afraid to fail, right? And so those are the behaviors that come from the imposter syndrome or self-doubt that was fueled by implicit bias or societal expectations that lead us into this place that keep us from being our best and happiest and brightest selves.
Hmm.
What do you do about it? So we have to talk about it. And then we do some things like really looking at our strengths,
Hmm.
right? So like to go through like understanding you're not alone and then taking a look at all of my successes and how did I get there? And like, it wasn't on luck. It was hard work. I was here, I did this, I achieved that, right? And so it's like really looking at your successes
Like
in a
doing an inventory.
yes, exactly. Doing an inventory of your successes and really having and blowing up this whole idea that, wow, look at all the luck I had. No, we actually did that. And then really looking at our own um, disempowering beliefs that we have, right? And because we all have these beliefs, we all do, we carry
Yeah.
these beliefs around. And so to really kind of say, what is it that I'm believing that's not true? And we can carry some stuff all the way from childhood, you know?
Absolutely. There is a book called The Untethered Soul, and the first line in it says, uh, to thine own self be true, which is Shakespeare, but which self?
Right.
What part of you is showing up? So I shared that I felt inadequate when you showed up on the webinar being amazing you. And to your point, then I have done enough practice that I was aware, oh, that came up. That's not true. And so I'm going to show up differently and I'm going to challenge those thoughts. And I think this is so pivotal because I believe a lot of times we call it magical thinking, like, okay, I'm just not going to think that, or oh, okay, I'm not going to believe that. No, you are. I did. And here I am, have a portfolio of accomplishment and credentials as well. So that is, I think, is one of the biggest playbooks. Because the other part of this podcast is we need a playbook for all the women I coach and mentor, especially in their early stages of careers. They'll say, "I wish there were a playbook for us. I wish we would know what to say, what to do." And so that is a key piece of this work.
Well,
So
what the example that you just gave, right, that's a very typical thing that we do often, is we look at someone else. I do it too, and other people in our field, and like, oh my God, look at them. I'm so unaccomplished
you
compared.
do, Betsy?
Oh yeah. We
Okay,
all,
see, that makes me feel better.
oh my God, oh, totally do. Oh yeah. I mean, you'll look at people like, wow, look at Mel Robbins. How does she have 2 million social media followers? Like, she's amazing. Like, it's then you start this story, right? And so I
Right.
think going back to what we do about that is learning to distinguish between feelings
Yes.
and facts in assessing our capabilities, right? So
Yep.
it's a feeling I'm having. It's so normal, particularly in the social media world where you look on people's
Oh,
and you look at them, they have 2 million followers. They're so amazing. Like, and so then you have to go, wait, you have to back up and not
Betsy, that is so powerful, honestly, because I also believe this is a very important part of us empowering one another is that women need to share our vulnerability with other women, right? Hearing you say that to me, and when I hold you in such esteem and appropriately so, and hearing that you yourself experienced that. And you mentioned in the webinar that you were at a forum and you were with executive women. And let's talk a little bit about that, that you were surprised to hear that what they struggled with.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think that's the thing that's so great is that about women sharing. I mean, I've done work around female alliance,
Yep.
because for so long, for those of us over 50 plus, we remember, I mean, and we still hear it all the time where women weren't supportive because there wasn't as supportive because there were so few women at the top.
Yep.
And now we've definitely made inroads into that, although we still have a far way to go. But the importance of female alliance is so important. And one of the key, I think the most important thing about female alliance is, oh, me too.
Yep.
I've had that experience. You're not alone. And so all the things that women struggle with, trying to balance work and family is a big one because
Yeah.
we'll never balance that. We integrate. And I always say times in your life when your children are in certain stages. And I always think you can, and every child is different, every family is different. So
Sure.
families, your kid needs you more in elementary school, or another family, your kids need you more when they're in high school or whatever. So as a parents, you have to assess where your kids are. But when my daughter was a teenager and it's kind of learn how do you parent a teenager, I used to say, like when I would go out and speak to crowds, I'd say, anyone in this audience trying to wrap your arms around leading or being a parent to teens, come up at the afterwards. And so people would come up and we'd have these interesting conversations because I think it's so important to share,
Yes.
because you learn from each other. If we're all going through the same stuff, you go, oh, me too, and I tried this, or I read this book. And
Yeah.
that's what's so important. And that's what you learn from. I don't care if I'm with women in banking or real estate or government or academia. We share so many common threads
Yes.
and
Yeah.
feelings and experiences.
Hmm.
So often it's right there, right among us. I call peer learning, peer sharing is why it's so important to have female alliances.
Which is the origination of the female quotient, Shelley Zollis's work,
Yes.
where she went to big events and had that room, right? A safe room to be able to talk about these things. And now we're saying, let's do more than talk. How do we actually structurally put these back into our organizations? And we're talking a lot about business because you and I are business women. This is though, across all platforms, social, political, environmental, it all contributes to and preventing us from being our best self. One of the things that you mentioned about there weren't enough women at the top. Not only is that accurate, right? So I have a strong HR background, and so I always like to say we didn't have a change management plan. So if you think about it, back in the 60s, right? For those of us who watched Mad Men, and I was even so surprised when I watched Mad Men, I thought, oh wait, I didn't realize it was that bad still back then. We were never welcome. It was okay, we're going to let you in the workforce, but you follow our rules. I like to say we were members without benefits.
Mhm.
And and our natural instincts and the way we operate as women, right? Like Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village, we had to abandon that because if I am supporting you, Betsy, I'm not supporting me and I'm trying to get to the top because there were only a few. And then again, one of the tenets of this podcast is to be fearlessly and authentic, rather, is then those women also had to act that way. And they were modeling, in some cases, bad behavior. Example, I was a secretary, that we did call it a secretary back in the day. That's where I started. I was working in an executive search firm. And we had all the periodicals and everything. So I would work during the day and then I would just sit there after work and I would read The American Banker and a woman, a senior vice president woman, came over to me and asked me what I was doing. And I told her, and she said point blank, you're never going to get anywhere. She didn't sit next to me. She didn't say, that's so great for you, because I was at night school at that point. So no judgment. The point is, I think we were conditioned. So I think that, and that part where you said earlier, oh, I'm evaluating myself against someone else, like Mel Robbins. I also do that, by the way. And I adore her. So I think they're both true. So I also believe, and this again comes from my HR background, that behavior is a line item, just like sales, just like marketing. So when I ask men of industry, have you ever asked a woman if she has imposter syndrome? Have you ever asked a woman if she's safe? No. So to your point, it's about having the conversation, but then structurally, whether you have a big organization in an HR or DEI organization, or if you're someone in the grocery store, the first thing that we need to do is to be aware of the narrative we're having and then challenge it. And I think the other part is to speak it out loud, which is part of our conditioning. Don't
Right,
say, like, be polite, don't rock the boat. So if you feel, to your point, because that's important, everyone, you're feeling that you have imposter syndrome, you're not. It's just
right,
an old belief system. Then that ability to even say, is that true? So if someone says something to you like, that's not going to work, or shuts you down, or steals your idea, or whatever you're feeling, to literally use those words.
right. But you know what? It's interesting because I want to back up to what you said about the woman who came and sat next to you,
Who
because
didn't sit next to me?
but she made the comment to you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's an example of those microaggressions that someone says something to you,
Hmm.
right? And you carry it. Like how many years ago was that? You're telling me that story.
Yeah, it was 1984.
Right. So 40 whatever years later, you're telling me that story.
So true.
Right.
Oh my gosh, Betsy, it's so true.
Right. So that's the imposter. I mean, that fuels. And the other thing I want to say is I'm not even sure everyone knows they would even say, oh, I have the imposter syndrome. They're just exhibiting behaviors of self-doubt and, and going into behaviors like perfectionism. I don't want to fail. Perfectionism is a result of the fear of failure, because if
Yeah,
I put my hand up, if I go for something and I don't make it, right, then I'm whatever that is. So that's why the feelings of worthiness are, kind of fueled in here, because am I worthy, which my lack of confidence or lack of or self-doubt is all fueled by outside forces.
right.
And that's what we have to, so a comment like that, but one comment, and then if there's multiple comments over time, it wears us down. And that's why this conversation is so important, to say, hey, wait a minute, that's just somebody's opinion. You don't have to take that on. That's not true. So all of this is just right, manifestation of bullshit
Right.
and other people's stuff that we take on.
Yep.
And we have to fight against it and to say, wait, just the actual awareness of, wait, that's crazy that woman said that in all those years and you're carrying that around. Let's get rid of that, And then
Yep.
some of us will say, yeah, I had something like that too. We've all had comments like that at us, and they come from various reasons but it's other people's stuff. And we somehow take it on like the monkey on the back.
Right. And especially, and you mentioned this earlier, because we internalize. That's part of how we process, right? And again, disclaimer, not all women, not all men think we're not assigning strict attributes. However, based on research, based on our experience, that is true. And where I got skewed, and I believe many women get skewed, is I wasn't then also saying, well, what's mine and what's not mine,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yes.
So from one of the things that's also intrigued me, Betsy, is there is such important data about how this limits, right? We know that, first of all, you said 70% of people feel this. Well, if 70% of the people are represented in an organization of 1,000 people, then that's limiting the ability to work together, to connect genuinely, et cetera. Meaning, I believe there's genuine money on the table here. And
Yeah.
I've always looked at, well, what do executives and especially CEOs want? They want to make more money, right? They want profitability for their shareholders. So my question is, in your view, Why do you believe that even in the face of that data, that there's still such little movement of understanding? Hey, I have a barrier in my business. It's called a widget. Well, we go after it, we change it. I have a barrier in my business that's called imposter syndrome. Crickets. Well, what's the disconnect between the facts and the profitability? Why are they not getting it?
That's an interesting question that we've been having for a long time, right? Like why it just seems so obvious. And
So obvious.
the data goes back because I remember when I worked in the Clinton world in the 90s, there was research out from the Labor Department in 92 and 93 saying more women in senior roles, more women on your corporate board equals higher profit. And, in today's world, when 80% of consumer spending is done by women, and you look at all the contributions, companies want to match their salespeople or have a company that connects with their customer. So it's just so obvious. So I think that's an interesting, like, why are we still, struggling at the highest ranks of corporate America, even though we're at, 20 to 30% of the C-suite now is women, but and there's research that shows once you get to 30%, there's more of a cascading effect.
Yep, the tipping point.
Right. But we still have a male-dominated corporate world, and we're still seeing just, based in the US presidency that we just re-elected Donald Trump, that there's still a connection to the authoritative leader.
Yes.
And the definition of what leadership looks like is still skewed in a masculine model. Even though I find that fascinating because all of the leadership speaking and talk and teaching that the leadership field does, you and I are part of it, is a more heart-focused feminine model of leadership,
It's
which is
true.
actually working, in what younger generations are pulling away from the authoritative masculine patriarchy.
Yep. Pardon me. I did a webinar, I was attending a webinar yesterday, and it was about empathetic negotiations. To your point, we recognize that we can't just force our way through. I believe for me, stepping back a little bit to that point about the election, the biggest realization I had is what you said, that America specifically feels safe with raw, dominant power. Okay, stop new sentence. So if I don't judge that, if I can just say, okay, they're telling me this is what makes me feel safe, then how do we move forward to demonstrate that women are also raw power strength, right? Meaning, one of the stats you gave in the webinar where there were I think it was Fast Company that said there were 30 or 40 critiques that women get that men don't get.
Oh,
So
yes.
right? So that contributes to, hey, we are powerful, but you're not seeing it because there's these narratives that go around. Let's unpack that a little bit. What are those critiques, and what are some of your thoughts in coaching with people on how we move forward through that?
Well, the critiques are like what we were talking earlier, and a great example of that is, well, assertive versus aggressive, right? And so that kind of societal expectations over years and years, it's okay for a man to be aggressive, he's just assertive. But when a woman's aggressive, that's, we call her the B
Offensive.
word. And, that's like behavior that's just, we're appalled by or makes us uncomfortable or whatever. So, and it's interesting because when you think of other countries who've had female leaders at the top, we look at Mexico, which I think is fascinating in a very male-dominated culture. In Mexico, in a Catholic country, they have a Jewish woman as their president.
Right.
So it is fascinating about what is it about the US and why are we, still hanging on to an old model, even though it's not working in most places. And, because we do see that things are changing, but it just seems, I think when any time change, sometimes people get afraid there's too much change, so they go back
Yeah.
to the model that they're comfortable with, right?
So true.
So it's like the 3 steps forward, 2 back, kind of,
Uh-huh.
we elected Barack Obama, a lot of people think there was a backlash to having a Black president. So it's like you have this amazing Black president, and then we slip back to Donald Trump, so a white authoritative leader.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're not, no, no, if we're really comfortable with that. And then we elect Joe Biden, who is a man of principle and kindness. And then
Right.
maybe he's too nice. So we got to go back, so it's interesting, right? It's this comfort level of leadership. And we kind of swing back and forth to, what we want and don't want. So I think we've made a lot of progress with women in leadership, but we still, in society, still have a part of us that haven't agreed totally on what leader, right? Like what is
Right.
the,
It's the agreement.
because the truth is, what I find interesting is that in today's world, outside of the unicorn we're seeing in our presidency in the US, most, most corporate leaders need to have some kind of heart. Nobody
Right.
wants, right? So they're not, so leaders who are showing up, of course, across different fields, who are all in their masculine energy aren't succeeding either. And
Right.
right. So we're
Right.
seeing that. So there's this movement to have a kinder, gentler leadership model. That's the integration of the head and heart. You can't just be all heart and you can't be all head.
Right. And I think that's pivotal. We are in that integration. And I am much more of an idealist where I can just say, hey, we just decide. We decided to work from home during COVID. We did. So we could decide to do this too. We can just organize it and put these structures in. But we're complicated and complex beings.
Yeah.
I think we just opened up a really important point here, Betsy, that power, the way it feels safe, right? At the end of the day, as human beings, our brains are wired to make sure we're safe. So, and regulated. So we are saying safety feels like power and strength. And this idea of a man, let's even use the idea of a dad, an integrated dad, a supportive dad, is really 30 years old, right? That's not the role that the men played. So we, for a long time, have been organized by I go to my mom, I go to women for comfort, for support, for nurturing. Now you're telling me, whether this is conscious or subconscious, I actually, when you're powerful, maybe I feel abandoned. Maybe I actually don't feel safe. So perhaps this idea of safety is something we need to address in the conversation. What makes you feel unsafe? What about women in power that makes you feel unsafe or that you're not in good hands? Because you named the president of Mexico. There was the prime minister of New Zealand. There's so many people that have led. Margaret Thatcher. She had an interesting blend, I'll say.
Yeah.
She was a power, but she got along with those guys because she did emulate them very much, right?
Yeah.
And there were haters on her side too. But to your point, I think it's about that safety. That I just realized this as we're talking. What do you think?
Well, it's a generational thing too, right? Because Thatcher was very much of leaned more into her masculine
She did.
of leadership, right? But Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, is
Right.
amazing because she was so young
Oh,
and
okay.
it was a
Yeah.
real integration of the head and heart. I mean, she really she had the strength to do things like when they had the mosque shooting, get rid of guns or,
Pretty
whatever.
unanimously.
Yeah, she did it and she was able to do it. But at the same time, she managed through COVID and was able to be human and show her vulnerability and do things like her cabinet all took a 10% pay cut, things like that. Like she really empathized with people and her message is all about we're in this together, we're one big family, and it's about kindness.
Yes.
But she's a generational change,
Okay.
so I think there's something about because younger leaders today they want younger constituents want something different,
Yes, thankfully. I
so
always appreciate that. When I look, pardon me, when I look at, I love that especially the women are saying, no, we're not doing that. No, you may not speak to me that way. Where we didn't want that, but I've talked about this on other episodes. I was openly groped in the office in my early career, and that was I didn't like it. I told them not to do it, but it was not a big deal. Where
right.
that is, so the good news is you would get fired for that. That is considered a crime now. So we are slowly we're making a lot of progress and slowly evolving. And it's about challenging that, no, this wasn't always that way. We smoked in offices. We don't do that anymore. So we can do this too. And that's why these conversations are so critical. So having them for yourself, but then also having them within your community. And for me, one of the biggest parts of our conversation has been that transparency, that me too. I experienced that too. And I think
Yeah.
we need to show, especially the earlier generations of women, that that's okay. And then invite the others in there too.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting because I think change is an interesting thing. Anytime you're trying to change, people are afraid of change, makes people uncomfortable. And so change, it's just like when you think about like this backlash happening now with DE&I, diversity and
Right.
inclusion, right? This uncomfortableness. And so it's like change takes time. So that's why I was saying it's 5 steps forward or 3 steps forward and 2 back. It's like this backlash back. And so I think it just takes longer for people to kind of get comfortable with, you know, when you think about gay marriage, you know, how that was just like, you know, and then all of a sudden it got on the ballot in 2004, and now we don't even think about it. Nobody's challenging
Right.
gay marriage now, right? That was just so out, you know. So culture takes time to change, and
Drat.
yeah, I know. So,
However,
but here's the thing, why this conversation is so important, because I always say to people, you know, what is it that you can control in your life?
mhm,
You. That's the only thing
it's
you can
true.
control, right? And so, you know, it's, and I just to poke back to Mel Robbins, she's got this new book out called Let Them.
Yes.
And I've been reading it, it's really great. And, you know, it's just such a simple mess. Sometimes the best messages are pretty simple, which is let them, they're gonna them, whoever them is, let them be them. That's, you can't change other people, but that you can have some impact on yours. You have a lot of impact on yourself. So that's why it's like with all of this stuff swirling around, what is it that each of us as individuals can do? And part of it is being aware and to say, wait a minute, you know, whether you call it the imposter syndrome or a little self-doubt or I don't feel worthy, just to be able to, let's start talking about this, because this aspect is what's keeping us women from stepping into the best versions of ourselves and
Absolutely.
eliminating behaviors like perfectionism, like overworking, like I'm afraid to fail and raise my hand. So
Yeah.
let's start to talk about this and say, let's just blow this up and support each other as, you know, sisterhood, get our male allies, because that's important too, to say, let's challenge this thinking, you're not alone. We're all in this
Right.
together. Because so many of us, as the, you know, we've talked about this, the statistics, feel this at one point or another in our careers, in our lives.
Absolutely. Which I was just going to dovetail into one of your other premises, which is build your support network. Right. So talk about a few tangible, we talked about talking to each other, being in groups, but what are some other things that women and men can do to build a support network that would advance us?
Yeah, so that's really important. The support network is everything, right? Because we are, I always say leadership is a human sport. You know what I mean? That
Right,
we,
that's true.
it's a human sport. And what is the most
A
important?
human sport. I love that.
You know? And the most important thing in life is our relationships and our friendships and our community. So we don't need to go through life alone. And that's the thing that I find amazing in my work is that women, you'll have these conversations and with women, and they'll be like, oh, you feel that? You know, like I felt that's the only one who felt this or was struggling
Yes.
with that. So what I say to people, there's lots of ways to do it, and you don't need to overthink it. You know, if
That's
there's
important. Don't
right,
overthink it.
no, you just get a couple women together in your organization or in your neighborhood or from somewhere in your life to say, you know, can we have a structured or not structured, but a once a month coming together or whatever it works for you to kind of say, let's just have these conversations and support each other. And you could be as simple as, you know, each month we're going to have a topic, or each month, each person brings their kind of what they're struggling with and we'll support it. So there's lots of ways to do it, and
Mhm.
just do it, you know, set up a lunch, a coffee,
Yep.
know?
And we think these are so small, but they're not, right? I really, that's a lot of the feedback I've gotten over the last decade, actually. These seem so, yep, we can all have conversations, but what does that all matter? It does matter. But then you have to, because of what we just talked about, I believe the connective tissue is also then, what are we going to do? How then are we going to support each other in this? And I think at the minimum, the very basics are asking each other these questions, having these conversations, but then sponsorship. So one of my, whether, and I coach to this, whether it's men or women, you need to know the play, right? So if I'm going into a meeting, then I have pre-flighted with my partner, mentor, person, when we're in this meeting and this person constantly shuts us down or does this, here's the play. Here's how we're going to support each other. We are committed to saying, is that true? Or tell me more. Tell me more about that belief, because my research shows. So that connective tissue on that actionable part. And I believe that there are, because I've also been doing a series called The Man Code on, well, if there is a code, guys, tell me what it is, so we can work with you. And when I really unpacked that, Betsy, what I realized is men do want to help. I think the majority of the men do, right? I have this big saying, it's not all men, it's some of them, but they're pretty powerful of those some.
Yeah. Yes.
But that I've asked them, what is your role in asking them if you have imposter syndrome, asking them if they're safe, making sure that when you're in the room, that when someone defers to someone else, you yourself then go, good question, but back to Betsy. So that's that support network too. And that goes to having courage, right? Because I hear a lot, well, I'm afraid. Well, what are you afraid of? I'm afraid that they won't do it. Okay, but you know what? Abraham Lincoln ran what, nine or 13 times before he became president, and he is a legend of history. So it's about having the courage then to go to those places as well.
But also have conversations about, let's talk about failure. Is failure bad?
No.
You know what I mean? Failure is
Yeah, such a good point, Betsy.
yeah, I mean, failure is anyone who's very successful in their career or in life has had many failures because every time you stick your head out, there's chance you're going to get, smacked or whatever. And it's just part of life. And so the more you do it and you realize, wow, I tried that, it didn't work, but I'm still here. And, when I talk to university students and we have these conversations about risk and the fear of risking, and I would say, well, if you want to have a spectacular life, you're going to have to risk and put your head up. If you want to have a beige life, where it's pretty stable, steady, and there's not a whole lot of excitement, then you won't, that's
I
not
love that term,
beige.
beige, a beige life. And again, you hit something very important that's helped me here. I always love learning from you, Bets, that it is generational, very generational in terms of never see it sweat. Leader has to know, that dominant, the power, what I call the GE model. I used to worship at the fore of GE. I really did. I thought Jack Welch was like one of the most amazing leaders, but and I'll give him his due. However, that do it at any cost, don't, demonstrate leadership that, is really hurt us a lot, not just us as women, but the industry. And it's been now over these last 10, 20 years, the Brene Browns of the world who are saying, no, there's actually power in vulnerability. There's power in saying, I don't know. What do you think? I'm afraid too, right? And
Exactly.
you mentioned earlier about your child, and I think it also goes to, yeah, if you're in the middle of a storm, you're not going to tell your child you're afraid, right? Because you need to be the leader. So read
Right.
the room. There are times when that might not be the case. But so we need more people being more vulnerable and talking about it. And then structurally, just like you mentioned about gay marriage, then how do we build that, especially into business, that we have performance management, we have plans, we have one-on-ones, we have all of these tools where we're talking about the values, et cetera, your metrics, but to include this. Where, when you're in meetings, do you show up where you are not your best self, where you are not being quiet, where you are being quiet, et cetera? So structuring this change But the generational parts are really important, which is why, again, this podcast is around I'm going to actually have an intergenerational panel in the future to really talk about how do we continue to move forward with these things. Okay,
Right.
Betsy, so you broke it down for us. We understood what it is. We talked about the power of facts, challenging our limit beliefs, leveraging your strengths, and building your support network. Anything else you want to leave with our listeners today?
Well, and also too, when we talk about leveraging our strengths, I just want to add one more thing is that part
Please.
of our self-doubt and things like when we struggle with confidence, because we're so focused on what's wrong with us all the time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so what I think is important is to say, wait a minute, all the things that are right, our strengths that are right about us, those are the things to spend time and nurture our strengths. And yes,
So
you have
important.
to have awareness of your things that aren't working for you. That's really important, and how to, surround that with either other people or modifications of behavior, but going towards the beautiful things that give us energy and our strengths is part of going towards our authentic self.
That is such a good point because even in my questioning, right, I'm focused on what are we not doing enough of? How are we? Because growth's about learning and growing. However, showing really owning your strengths and I love your term earlier, like we're inventorying them, so that when you feel, because you are not your feelings, you feel your feelings, you think your thoughts. Also, The Untethered Soul. I love that book. Um,
Yes.
so when you're challenging that, to really make sure that you can catalog them to say, I feel inadequate, case in point, right? Back to the beginning of the conversation. But then I went, I know that's not true. I know that's not true. And then to be okay with the uncomfortable feeling in your body that it's not instant. You're not going to instantly believe it. But a belief is something you learned until you unlearn it and believe something different. So over time, it will happen and being able to lead with those strengths. I think that really helps. Oh, that even helped me, Betsy.
Do you know Louise Hay's work? She's passed
Yes.
away now, but I'm a big fan of hers, and I've studied her stuff for years. But one of the things she used to say is that a belief is just a thought you keep thinking,
And it's so true.
right? A belief is a thought you keep thinking. So change your thoughts, change your beliefs,
Yep.
and change your beliefs. Like, to think about that. And that's what just everything we're talking about today, the building the community and challenging these negative thoughts about ourselves that aren't true.
Right.
Back to the very beginning of what this whole imposter syndrome is all about is beliefs about ourselves that are not true.
Right. Right. It's a deceiving ourselves. It's a blinding to ourselves. We're not out there being imposters. Again, the Webster definition is intending. That's the big key here. It's an intention to deceive. We're not doing that. We
Mm-mm.
are not believing who we actually are. And I really overemphasize that it's okay to feel uncomfortable about it. I often have to, I use many tools, but there's a poet I adore. His name is David White with a Y. And he is amazing. And I've seen him speak. And he was so comfortable. He forgot what he was saying. And then he went to his notes. And I thought, how come he didn't need to be perfect, right? So I talked to him afterwards and he said, oh, every time I am actually completely nervous and I have this little boy in me and I tell him to stand under the podium and say, just come along with me. You're here because Emily Fletcher with Ziva Meditation has a saying, feelings just want to be felt.
You love that. Mhm.
So if we can say, okay, I feel you. I feel you inadequacy. I feel you fear. It's real, not true.
Right.
So come on with me. And I think that the modeling, right? The modeling is so, so, so important. So leading on strength, Betsy, you are one of the strongest voices out there. You are an incredible presence in your business life, your professional life, all the work you've done. And I am so honored to have you on the podcast and to continue to work with you on this as well. Do you have any other closing comments?
Just to say that, we have to do this together, and let's bring this conversation, this idea about blowing up the imposter syndrome and all the intersections of it that are not true for each of us, and to go on this journey together as women to shake this up and get rid of the imposter syndrome.
I couldn't agree more. And what you did and said and do in your life is completely modeling my ethos, which is let's stop taking it personally and start taking action. And that action is believe in yourself, challenge your thoughts, challenge the narratives, be out there and be aware of it. I do an episode about permission because that's part of this. Even giving yourself permission to challenge it, permission to say the things. I cannot tell you how many, specifically women, when I say, well, why didn't you say anything? They literally will say, I didn't know I could, because the system has created it and we're not challenging that, but we are here. So thank you for
Thank
taking
you.
action. And I will look forward to seeing you in the future. Betsy Myers.
And appreciate it.
All right, podcast revolutioners, what you just heard wasn't just a conversation, it was a shift. With Betsy, we flipped the script on manufactured doubt and gave you additional tools and perspectives to understand it, repattern it, and eventually shut it down. So now it is your move. The only difference between those who break through and those who don't is that they stop waiting for permission, stop taking it personally, and start taking action, even when you feel afraid. Whether they're small steps or observations or big, bold moves, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you take a step. So here is my challenge for you this week: the call to action. When that voice creeps in, the one that whispers, you don't belong, and my old favorite, you will be found out, call it what it is: manufactured doubt, a system engineered lie designed to keep you small. And that interruptive moment can remind you of who you are and then work with all of the other tools that you have. I want you to walk into that boardroom, that stage, that negotiation, and own it like you were born for it, because you were. You can challenge the status quo in real time. When someone talks over you or steals your idea or attempts to dismiss you, pause, take a breath. That moment of power is so important, and reclaim your voice. Actually, I'd like to finish my thought. I believe that was my point. No apologies, no shrinking. I want you to apply for that position you think you're underqualified for, because I got to tell you, men apply to jobs that they're overqualified at a rate of like 60% or more, is some of the stats I've seen. And I want you to sit at the table, literally, walk into the meeting, and I want you to take the power seat, not the corner seat, not the one where you're going to take notes. I want you to sit tall. I want you to speak with conviction, and don't wait for permission to exist in that space. It is okay to feel incredibly uncomfortable. It is okay to feel panic and dread, but those are simply feelings that will get repatterned out as neuroplasticity takes in with every time you practice and every time you sit at that table. And be bold where it matters. Correct a misquote, call out a bias, say the thing that needs to be said, because everyone else in that room is thinking it, but you're the one with the courage to say it. And this is how you shift from waiting to leading, from doubting to deciding, and from shrinking to shaping the future. Because let me tell you something, most men do this every single day. They just show up, and sometimes with half of the qualifications and twice the overconfidence. So today I end with a quote from Malcolm Forbes, who says, "Too many people overvalue what they are not and undervalue what they are." Sounds like he knew something about manufactured doubt. So please give yourself permission to value what you bring to the table, to the room, to the world, without apology, without hesitation, and without the belief that you are an imposter, because you now know that you are not. And every time you reject the lie of imposter syndrome, you are not just freeing yourself, you're rewriting the script for everyone who comes next. Every time you step into your power, instead of shrinking, even when you feel afraid or unsure, You are setting a new standard, creating a new reality, one where confidently owning your place isn't questioned and belonging isn't earned, it's just assumed. And one day, this won't even be a conversation. But until that day, we move and we act and we lead, relentless, unstoppable, carving a new path like water through rock, not with force, but with consistency and power and the certainty that we will not be stopped. So until next time, thank you for joining me. Be safe, and remember, the era of evasion is over. Now go take up that space that was always yours, and I'll see you next time.
Please don't take